You want to know the truth?
Yeah.
It was when I saw it with her, when
That-
we were in previews.
I mean,
You want to know the truth? Not the polished Hollywood version, not the whispered rumors traded like currency at late-night parties, but the truth that only a 76-year-old man who has lived, loved, and survived the rise and collapse of entire eras can finally say out loud. For decades, Richard Gere moved through Hollywood like a myth. That impossible charm, the kind that wasn't learned, it was crafted. The quiet power in his voice, the confidence in the way he walked into a room, making everyone instinctively turn to look. Those dark, watchful eyes that always seemed to know something you didn't, and maybe never would. Behind the tailored suits, behind the carefully measured smiles, behind the reputation of one of Hollywood's most desired men, there was a question no one dared to ask him directly, a question wrapped in secrecy, speculation, rumors, and half-truths. Who were the women? The real women? The ones who shaped him, scarred him, changed him, and stayed hidden behind closed doors? Because in the private archives of Richard Gere's life, there aren't dozens, there aren't hundreds, there are seven actresses, 7 icons, 7 women whose names, some whispered, some confirmed, became entangled in his personal history for more than half a century. And for the first time, at 76 years old, with nothing left to prove, he finally decided to reveal them. Not to boast, not to shock, not to chase publicity, but because the truth at his age matters more than the mystery. And when you hear the names of these 7 women, when you understand who they were and just how deeply they touched both his life and the history of Hollywood itself, you'll realize something. Richard Gere didn't just live through the golden era of Hollywood. He loved through it, and he was shaped by it. Now, let's begin with the woman who unknowingly placed the first cornerstone of his romantic legacy. The woman whose connection with him ran deeper than anyone ever realized, Priscilla Presley. Priscilla Presley wasn't just another name in Hollywood's orbit. She was an era, a symbol, a woman forever linked to one of the most mythic figures America had ever created. And Richard Gere, he was absolutely bewitched by her, long before the public ever saw them together. Their connection didn't begin as a tabloid stunt or a casual dinner caught by paparazzi on a slow night. It began quietly, almost tenderly. 2 people in their 40s, each carrying a past far heavier than the world around them ever truly understood. Gere was still climbing, fighting to prove he was more than a beautiful face in expensive suits. He wanted respect. He wanted depth. He wanted to be taken seriously. Priscilla, on the other hand, was navigating the complicated aftermath of a life lived beside Elvis Presley. A man so adored, so worshipped, so mythologized, that loving him had been like living inside a hurricane. She was raising Lisa Marie carefully. She was rebuilding her own sense of stability. And she was still breathtaking, elegant in ways cameras could never fully capture. Those who were close to Gere at the time said something surprising. He wasn't just attracted to her beauty, he was moved by her strength. She grounded him, calmed him, softened the reckless ambition that had driven him for so long. In private, away from the flashbulbs, away from the suffocating expectations of fame, they shared long, quiet evenings together, conversations about survival, about loneliness, about the estranged cost of being adored by millions, but truly known by almost no one. To Gere, Priscilla was more than a romantic interest. She was a window into a world of emotional resilience, a life shaped by extraordinary pressure, and yet she remained dignified, composed, whole. But even the strongest connection can fracture under the weight of fame. As Gere's rising stardom demanded more from him, more travel, more roles, more absence, Priscilla needed stability, steadiness, a foundation he simply couldn't offer. Both were watched constantly, every step analyzed, every expression interpreted as a headline. And so, slowly, quietly, the relationship that had given them both refuge began to fade. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the heavy understanding that timing, not love, had been the true obstacle. Still, whether brief or long, whether known or forgotten by most, Priscilla Presley left an imprint on Richard Gere that no other woman ever fully replicated. And she was only the beginning. After Priscilla, Richard Gere stepped into a completely different chapter of his life, one defined not by quiet refuge, but by the blinding intensity of two global icons colliding at the exact same moment in history. Cindy Crawford wasn't just famous, she was the supermodel, a symbol of 90s beauty, a woman who could silence an entire room simply by walking through the door. And yet, behind the cameras and the magazine covers, she was disarmingly genuine, smart, clear-minded, driven in a way Gere admired deeply. When they first began appearing together, Hollywood didn't know what to make of it. Two perfect faces, two careers exploding at the same time, two people who carried the strange burden of being idolized everywhere they went. But for Richard Gere, it wasn't superficial, not even close. People who were close to him during those years said something rare. He was protective of her, proud of her, determined to show the world, and perhaps even himself, that what they shared wasn't a shallow celebrity pairing, but something with real emotional weight. And for a while, it was. They married in 1991, a wedding that felt like Hollywood royalty had finally found its king and queen. Flashes exploded, headlines erupted. Their union was treated as if it had been written in the stars, but fairy tales rarely survive the reality of two colossal careers moving at full speed in opposite directions. Crawford would later reflect carefully, diplomatically, that timing and life direction pulled them apart. Not cruelty, not betrayal, just incompatible momentum. The truth behind the scenes was even more delicate. Gere wanted something she wasn't yet ready to give. Maybe a different pace of life, a deeper level of commitment, or a vision of the future that didn't align perfectly with hers. The cracks appeared quietly at first, then slowly widened until the marriage simply couldn't hold together. And yet, unlike so many celebrity splits drenched in bitterness and public drama, their separation remained gentle, respectful, almost tender. Neither spoke poorly of the other. Neither sought revenge in interviews or memoirs. They simply walked away, carrying with them 4 years that were undeniably meaningful, formative, and deeply human. Cindy moved on to Rande Gerber, building a family, a life, and a stability that suited her differently. But to Richard Gere, those 4 years with her left a lasting imprint, a chapter he never erased, a reminder that love, even when it ends, can still be kind. And yet, as one door closed, another woman was about to enter his life, not with the explosive fame of Cindy Crawford, but with something Gere had begun to crave much more: substance, intelligence, and emotional steadiness. Her name was Carrie Lowell. After the whirlwind intensity of Cindy Crawford, Richard Gere shifted into a different emotional rhythm, a slower, steadier, more introspective chapter of his life, and that was when Carrie Lowell entered the picture. Carrie wasn't the kind of woman who needed to dominate a room. She didn't have to. Her presence was quiet but confident, elegant in a way that asked for no attention yet commanded all of it. A former Bond girl, a talented actress, a woman who carried depth beneath every measured word, every calm smile. To Gere, who had spent years living in the center of a spotlight that never dimmed, Carrie Lowell felt like a breath of stability he didn't even know he'd been craving. Their chemistry wasn't explosive like with Cindy. It was comfortable, human, real in that grounded way that makes you believe, just for a moment, that maybe this is the person who finally understands you. They were seen together at charity galas, intimate dinners, and the kinds of Hollywood gatherings where everyone watches everyone else. They didn't flaunt their relationship. They didn't hide it either. Instead, they simply existed together, quietly, confidently, like two adults who had lived enough life to know when a connection mattered. For several years, they built something that looked promising, something warm, something that made people whisper that maybe, just maybe, Richard Gere had found the partner who could match his depth and withstand the demands of his life. Carrie understood the actor's life in a way few others could. She knew about long shoots, changing schedules, the emotional weight of roles, the solitude that comes with fame, and she respected his need for freedom, and he respected her need for privacy. But even the most reasonable, mature, emotionally balanced connection can have fault lines. She wanted something quieter, more settled, more rooted in family than in constant motion. Gere, ever restless, ever searching, still needed the challenge, the movement, the unpredictability that had defined him for decades. Eventually, quietly, respectfully, the relationship reached its natural end. No drama, no bitterness, just two people recognizing that love sometimes isn't enough to bridge two different visions of the future. But while the world watched his romance with Carrie unfold, something else, something more elusive, was happening behind the curtain. Winona Ryder. Her name floated through the gossip columns like a shadow, a rumor, a whisper barely spoken above a murmur. Winona was young, brilliant, magnetic in that fragile, lightning-in-a-bottle way only she could be. They were photographed together at parties, at film premieres, at moments that could have meant everything, or absolutely nothing. No one knew. No one could confirm. Not then. Not now. Was it real? Was it imagined? Was it a brief spark or something deeper that neither of them ever wanted the world to dissect? When asked, Gere didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply offered that subtle, enigmatic half-smile, the kind that said everything and nothing at the same time. People close to him whispered that he appreciated Winona's intelligence and her vulnerability, that delicate mix of strength and fragility that made her feel like sunlight and shadow at the same time. Whether their connection was a quiet truth or a beautifully constructed myth, it became part of the tapestry of Richard Gere's romantic life, a gray space between imagination and reality where so many Hollywood stories live forever. And yet, even these whispered chapters were only stepping stones because the next woman in his life would bring something different entirely, a new world, a new culture, a new fire. Her name was Penélope Cruz. By the time Penélope Cruz entered Richard Gere's life, he had already lived through a lifetime of emotional highs and lows. He had loved icons, survived heartbreak, endured rumor storms, and quietly matured into a man who no longer chased the chaos of youth. But Penelope, she was something else entirely. She wasn't a Hollywood blonde or an American icon. She was European, fiery, soulful, deeply artistic in a way that awakened something in Gere that had long been dormant. Penelope was passion wrapped in elegance, intensity softened by grace, a woman whose commitment to her craft bordered on spiritual. And to Richard Gere, that was magnetic. When their relationship became public, people were surprised, not because they didn't look extraordinary together, but because it signaled a noticeable shift in Gere's life. He wasn't chasing youth anymore. He wasn't revisiting old patterns. He was choosing something deeper, richer, more layered. With Penelope, there was chemistry, undeniable, visible, impossible to hide, but there was also intellect, creativity, a kind of shared artistic hunger that brought them together in ways the tabloids could never fully understand. They were seen together openly at events, premieres, dinners, not as a Hollywood spectacle, but as two artists drawn to each other's fire. For Gere, this connection felt less like a detour and more like a turning point, a quiet declaration that he was entering a new emotional chapter, no longer defined by the frantic pace of his earlier fame. Yet even this passionate, beautifully unexpected relationship eventually reached its natural end. There were no scandals, no explosive headlines, no bitterness, just two people whose lives moved in different directions, one becoming a global icon in her own right, the other stepping into the final act of his Hollywood journey with a new kind of clarity. But those who knew them during that time said something remarkable. Penelope Cruz changed Richard Gere, not by loving him fiercely, but by challenging him intellectually, inviting him to think differently about art, life, purpose, and himself. She was like a spark that illuminated the path ahead, even after the romance quietly faded. But as significant as Penelope was, there was still one name, one woman, whose connection to Gere remains the most debated, the most whispered about, the most mysterious of all. A woman whose presence in his life exists somewhere between truth and myth. Julia Roberts. If there is one name forever intertwined with Richard Gere's legacy, one woman whose presence casts a shadow longer, softer, and far more mysterious than all the others, it is Julia Roberts. Their story has always lived in the gray space, too tender to deny, too ambiguous to confirm, too iconic to ever truly forget. Julia was not just a co-star. She was the co-star, America's sweetheart, a woman whose smile could warm a theater and whose eyes could unsettle even the most confident men. When she and Richard Gere appeared together on a screen, the chemistry was unmistakable. Not performed, not manufactured, but raw and electric in a way that made millions believe they were witnessing something real. And maybe, in some small secret way, they were. Because behind the scenes, away from cameras and carefully choreographed interviews, there were moments, quiet, fleeting, vulnerable, when the line between acting and feeling blurred into something neither of them ever fully explained. Hollywood whispered, fans speculated, journalists dug for clues. Were they together? Did something happen? Was there a romance hidden behind the scripts and the studio lights? No one knew. No one could say. But when Richard Gere was asked directly, years later, older, calmer, with nothing left to prove, he didn't deny it. He didn't confess either. Instead, he offered that unmistakable Gere expression. A subtle smile, a knowing nod, a glimmer in his eyes that held more truth than any words he could have spoken. And that was enough. Because sometimes the most intimate connections are the ones never confirmed, never defined, never labeled, never claimed publicly. Sometimes the power of a relationship lies in its secrecy, in the unspoken understanding between two people who lived a moment so fragile it could only survive in silence. To many, Julia Roberts was the what if, the near miss, the one who might have changed everything if timing had been kinder, but perhaps it was the mystery itself, the not knowing, the intentionally unfinished nature of whatever they shared, that made her chapter in Richard Gere's life so significant. She remained the question he never fully answered, the story he never clarified, the connection he never erased. And that silence said more than any admission ever could. But while Julia may have been the most mysterious, she was not the end of the story. Because at 76 years old, when Richard Gere finally chose to speak openly about these 7 women, he wasn't chasing rumors and he wasn't rewriting his past. He was preparing to confront something far more difficult, the truth of how each of them shaped him. At 76 years old, Richard Gere did something he had never done in 5 decades of fame. He opened the door, not wide, not recklessly, but just enough for the world to finally glimpse the truth behind the charm, the suits, the calm voice, and the legendary mystique he carried like armor. And when he named the 7 women, 7 actresses, 7 icons, 7 chapters of a life lived under relentless public scrutiny, he wasn't boasting, he wasn't bragging, he wasn't feeding the tabloids, he was reckoning. Richard Gere finally admitted what so many men never find the courage to confront, that his life, his art, his growth, his failures, his victories were shaped, challenged, and softened by the women who loved him and the women he tried and sometimes failed to love back. Each of these women saw a different version of him. Priscilla Presley saw the rising actor, hungry, searching, balancing vulnerability with ambition. Cindy Crawford saw the superstar, glowing, unstoppable, pressured by a world that worshipped and suffocated him at the same time. Carrie Lowell saw the man, steady, flawed, introspective, in need of something real. Winona Ryder saw the emotional shadow, youth, longing, a man reaching back towards something already slipping away. Penelope Cruz saw the artist, intellectual, curious, eager to evolve beyond Hollywood's expectations. Julia Roberts saw something unspoken, something neither of them ever defined aloud, a connection that lived in a silence, in the subtle look exchanged between takes, in the space between truth and performance. Each woman brought out a facet of him the public never saw. Each woman pulled him toward a different version of identity, love, and meaning, and Gere, after decades of secrecy, finally acknowledged the emotional cost of living a life where your private world is never fully your own. He admitted the truth that fame gives you everything except the freedom to love without judgment. By naming them, he wasn't exposing their secrets. He was honoring them, recognizing their roles in his evolution as a man, a partner, and an actor whose soul was shaped by the emotional storms he survived. He wasn't immortal, he wasn't invincible, he wasn't the flawless leading man the posters promised. He was human. And at 76, he finally let himself be seen that way. 7 women, 7 stories, 7 emotional fingerprints that remained on him long after the relationships faded. And the question that lingers now, the one he left for the world to wrestle with, is simple. Does this romantic history add to Richard Gere's legacy or complicate it? Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. Because the truth he revealed at 76 wasn't about a scandal or gossip or conquest. It was about gratitude, growth, and the quiet confession that love, real love,